You can love God anywhere, and you can love others no matter what you're doing. When Jesus was asked, what is the most important thing for me to do? He says, love God, love others. We need to stop waiting on a big sign from God before we do what we know we should do. And I'm just here to tell you, you know what your purpose is? Be obedient, love God, and love others. Good morning. How are we doing this morning? Woo! My name is Ed Carter. I'm one of the ministers on staff here. I'm so excited that you've chosen to be here. I brought my sweatshirt out. So we're going to continue talking about fresh starts in a series right now. And everyone at one time or another in their life wants a fresh start. Maybe it's a big, huge fresh start. You've been caught up in a bunch of stuff and you're like, I just need to move on, get past this. Or maybe it's a small fresh start where maybe you said something that you shouldn't have said to somebody and you're like, I just need a fresh start in this relationship. And we all know that it's hard. And every year, January 1st, people make these resolutions. And like 90% of these things fail. Year after year after year after year, they fail. And so this year, I wanted to start the year series called Fresh Start. So week 1, we talked about 3 things that'll help you get a fresh start in whatever area of life that you're looking to get a fresh start in. And the first thing is you have to decide what the win is. What are you actually trying to do and why are you trying to do it? So like if you're like, hey, I want to lose weight this year. Great. How much are you going to lose? Like name it. Like be as specifically as you can. Define what the win is. Because if you don't define what the win is, you're really aiming at nothing. And when you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. The second thing was to get support. Have people around you who love you, want you to succeed, but will also tell you the truth, even the hard truth. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later this morning. But the third thing is to take care of yourself. Physically, mentally, and emotionally, spiritually, take care of yourself. So those 3 things were kind of the building blocks the first week. And then last week we talked about Noah and the ark. And many people look at Noah and the ark as this beautiful kid story. We put the animals up in the nurseries, and I wanted to reframe that story last week. And I said, this is God looking at humanity and he's had enough. And I said that, we put Bible verses on our walls, even on the back of our cars. I said, nobody puts this verse on their walls. Genesis 6:6 says, the Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. Like we don't put the t-shirt with that on. Like nobody does that. But the story of Noah's Ark is a story of God's judgment, a story of God saying, this is how I will deal with people and their sin. And through Noah, we get a reset. God says, we're going to do this again. We're going to try it over. But the one thing that I want to share with you, or think about the Noah story a little bit more this week, is even though they got a fresh start, it wasn't a clean slate. See, for many people, they believe a fresh start is a clean slate, but a fresh start isn't always a clean slate. See, when Noah and his family, the 8 of them, were in that boat, things changed. Their homes were wiped away. One of the things that I began to think about was the marketplace. Like they would have had a system of support around them with humanity. There would have been people that probably made clothing, made shoes, harvested certain things. But when the reset happened, when the fresh start began, when all that water went away, who did they trade with? Who did they barter with? Now they were responsible for every single aspect. The chances are they had a community around them before. And oftentimes we think that a fresh start is going to be easier. That moving forward is going to provide a different path and it's going to have less. But oftentimes we'll look back, and I'm sure that Noah and his family looked back and said, man, life was a little easier before the flood. Like sometimes life is easier before the fresh start. Doesn't mean that it's better. Doesn't mean that you're not going in the right direction, but sometimes it's hard to do the right things, the healthy things. And sometimes we look at the past and we get caught up in it, remembering and wanting and desiring what was, and we can't even get to what could be. Sometimes we just can't let go of the past. My dad, I don't know how this happened. He grew up by Erie, Pennsylvania, but he became a Michigan fan. And so he was a Michigan fan. He had this ugly Michigan sweatshirt that my dad wore all the time. I mean, he wore it all the time. And me and my sisters would be like, we can buy you a new sweatshirt. Like, we can even get you a Michigan sweatshirt. It'll be great. But he wore that thing until there was holes all through it and just wore it out. Does anybody else have a grandfather or dad that does that? Anyone? Just me? So last year, my wife came to me and she's like, Ed, I need to talk to you about your sweatshirt. So I brought this sweatshirt out. So it's my Browns hoodie. And I'm a big Browns fan, glutton for punishment. And our defense had as many holes in it as this sweatshirt did this year. Oh, that was harsh. Some people are like, true but harsh. So this is my Browns hoodie, and you can see all of the holes that I wore in it. There are, in the elbows, there's holes, and all of that. But it's just ratty, nasty sweatshirt. But I would wear it all the time. So one day Stu came to me and she's like, Ed, we got to talk about that sweatshirt. And so every Thursday is my day off. I take Thursday as my day off. And we do date day Thursday. So Sue and I will leave it we drop Hannah off at school and then we go and we get lunch together and spend time together. It's date day Thursday. And I would wear this every date day Thursday. Yeah, she would get so mad. And she's like, Ed, you have other sweatshirts, right? And so I'm like, but this is my favorite. I love this sweatshirt. So I talked last week about how I've been in counseling and all that stuff. And so you laugh. You need, no, I'm just kidding. That's terrible to say. We all need, anyway. So I'm talking to my counselor about things. And I was laughing about the sweatshirt and how upset it made Sue. And so he's talking to me about it. He says, why do you wear that ratty old thing? I'm like, oh, it was a gift from my kids. You have all that. And then it shifted to my dad and his ratty old Michigan sweatshirt. And I said, every time I grab that sweatshirt, my dad passed away in 2020. I said, every time I grab that sweatshirt, it reminds me of my dad. And I wear it subconsciously just like my dad. And then I look back at the past and then you just can't let it go. And sometimes the past is hard to move on from. It's difficult. And sometimes it's okay, like ratty old sweatshirts, that's okay, right? You can hang on to those. Like you have an old piece of furniture at your house that has all the memories. It's okay, right? But there are other things in your life that you have to move on from. But they're hard and they're difficult. And so you look at it and you're like, it's an addiction. That every time stress begins to overwhelm you, you run towards it. I am a stress eater. I like to eat when I'm stressed, and I am stressed a lot. And some of you know exactly what that is. But maybe it's not that you eat. Maybe it's some other destructive thing that you do. And you just can't get past it. And every time it comes up, you're like, I know I should, but I'm comfortable there. So I just return over and over and over to that. Sometimes it's not even logical, but we do it. In the Old Testament, there's a story about a man named Nehemiah. Nehemiah is an Israelite. He's a Jew. And at this point in time, he is a cupbearer to the king of Persia. And what that means is he would test the king's food and drink before the king would eat it, so that if he got poisoned, Nehemiah would die instead of the king. To get that position, you have to be very, very well-liked and well-trusted. Maybe not so well-liked. No, definitely well-liked and well-trusted. The king thinks very highly of you so that you wouldn't poison him. So Nehemiah's cupbearer to the king of Persia. Persia had conquered the Babylonian Empire, who had conquered Jerusalem. So Jerusalem, the capital city of the Jewish people, the promised land of God, right, is under Persian rule. And Nehemiah is a trusted advisor of the king. So this is really important. So Nehemiah had a great affinity for Jerusalem, and he knew the history of Jerusalem. He understood that it was once a great city, a great nation, but right now it was under Persian rule. And so Nehemiah's brother shows up at the castle and has a conversation with Nehemiah. Nehemiah asks, how is the city and the people? And in Nehemiah chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, it says that they said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire. So at this time in history, if you had a city, you would build big walls and gates as protection, as a way to keep enemies out. And so the news that Nehemiah hears is that the city is in ruin and has no defenses and is very, very vulnerable. So this troubles Nehemiah. He is heartbroken about this. And remember when I said that you need people that will support you? You need people in your life, when you want a fresh start, that will give you bad news. I have never met with a leader, a real leader, who doesn't want the bad news. They want bad news. If something's going on in the company, at the plant down the road, you don't hide it from the boss. Bring the bad news. You want that. So Nehemiah, he's a person of influence. His brothers come. He says, how's it going? They don't hide the bad news. They say, listen, it's a mess. Stuff is not going well. And this breaks Nehemiah's heart. He says in verse 4, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. So Nehemiah does three things upon hearing this news. He cries, he's sorrowful, he fasts, and he prays. I want you to listen to the prayer of Nehemiah. It starts in verse 5. It says, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you, and we have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws that you have gave your servant Moses. So the first part of Nehemiah's prayer is, God, please hear us. And then the second part is he says, we've messed up. We've sinned. And he says it's collective. Collectively, we have sinned against you. The nation of Israel, me, my father's family, we all have sinned. He doesn't point fingers. He doesn't say, well, that wicked guy back there, he was really sinning, and I know that this is his punishment, and I'm just getting caught up in the wash. No. Nehemiah owns all of it. He says, we have sinned. And see, a fresh start begins with owning the past. It's really hard to move forward when you won't own what's behind you. You have to be able to look and say, look, I did this. I did that. We did this. We did that. To be able to move forward so we don't go back to that. And the prayer continues. He says, remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. And that's what has happened. That's why the Israelites are in exile. He says, if you're unfaithful, I'll scatter you. That has happened. And then Nehemiah says, but if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the furthest horizon, I will gather them from where they are, from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delighted in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. He's talking about the king of Persia. So kind of to unpack that a little bit, Nehemiah is praying a prayer of saying, look, help me be successful. Put your hand of blessing or favor on me. I know something needs to be done in Jerusalem, and I'm going to go have a conversation with the king. Help me be successful. One of the coolest things for me in the story of Nehemiah is that there's no great miracle that happens. Like you can't point to book, chapter, and verse where God lays the foundation for the city wall and then Nehemiah completes it. No. They do all of the work. The people. And oftentimes I think when we read Old Testament stories, we see God's hand. Like you read the story of David and Goliath and you just see how God worked in this teenage boy to kill this giant. You hear the story of the walls of Jericho coming down. And they just walked around the walls and they played the instruments and they screamed and the walls came down. You're like, God's hand's in the middle of that. You read the story of Jonah in the whale and you're like, he was in the whale for 3 days and then the whale vomited him out and it's crazy. And you're like, that's just never happened to me. But the story of Nehemiah is a story of a leader who does. Who sees something that has to be done and just takes the first step. He doesn't know the entire story, but he just moves forward. And so many of us are caught up waiting for our purpose. We're caught waiting for our purpose. And I'll hear people say this, I just don't know what God is calling me to do. I don't know where he's leading me. And so we don't do anything. We don't move forward. We don't advance at all. I hear people that'll say, I need to know what one thing God has equipped and empowered me to do more than anybody else, and I just need to be in that lane and do what I need to do. I say it's kind of like dating. Like I remember when I was dating, there's two words that when it comes to dating that drives me crazy. It's soulmate. Drives me nuts. Sue is not my soulmate. I love my wife. I'm committed to my wife. I made the decision that she is the only woman that I will love and cherish and honor, the only one. But I do believe that I could have made that same commitment to any number of women. And Sue could have made that commitment to any number of men, way more. She probably had a lot more options than I did. But I don't buy into the soulmate, that there's one person, just one. And I don't believe that there's only one called path for you. I believe that you can do what God has called you to do anywhere. Anywhere. I believe that God has called you to a life of obedience. You can be obedient no matter what you're doing. Well, unless you're being disobedient. You can love God anywhere. And you can love others no matter what you're doing. Like no matter what career path you choose, you can choose obedience, loving God, and loving others. When Jesus was asked, what is the most important thing for me to do? He says, love God, love others. See, we need to stop waiting on a big sign from God before we do what we know we should do. Stop waiting on God. See, we try to make, man, I've got a 18-year-old son. He's just graduating. Do you know the pressure that is on that kid? Like, it's incredible the pressure that we put on 18-year-olds and 23-year-olds. At 18 years old, do you know that your brain is not fully developed? It's not developed. Do you know what part of your brain that's not developed? The part that makes wise decisions is not yet fully developed. And this is what we're asking 18-year-old boys and girls. We want you to make the decision on what you're going to do for the rest of your life. I know that your brain isn't developed. I know that it's not functioning at its full capacity yet. But tell me today, not only do I want you to tell me today what you're going to do, I want you to sign up for $100,000 in debt to tell me what you're going to do for the rest of your life. Choose your path. Choose it wisely. And then we do it again when they're 23 years old, when they graduate college. You got to make this decision. You got to make this decision. And I just think, man, the pressure that we're putting on. And here's what I realized. There are people in this room that have been retired for 4 or 5 years. You still don't have it figured out. You're still looking for your purpose. You're still thinking like, well, and I'm just here to tell you, you know what your purpose is? Be obedient, love God, and love others. Matthew chapter 22, starting verse 37, Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. The second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All of the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. In Mark chapter 10, Jesus says this, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And then in John chapter 13, Jesus says, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. So how does the world know that you're a follower of Jesus? In the way that you love one another. It's mission critical. If you're like, I want to live on purpose for God. I want to live in the will of God. Here, I'm going to give it to you. Love people. Love people. I want to live in the grace of God. I want his blessings to flow. Then be obedient and love him and love his word and love his church. I had a phone call this week from, I don't even know who it was. It was somebody called, and we get a lot of benevolence. We help a lot of people in our community. And we typically will do it without asking many questions. Sometimes we're probably overly generous. But I get a call, and it's a reverend. This is a Reverend so-and-so. So Jackie's like, hey, Ed, there's a reverend on the phone. He needs some help. And I'm like, okay. So I get on the phone. I say, hey, this is Ed Carter. How can I help you? Doesn't introduce, just starts talking about his need. And I'm like, okay, can I ask who I'm talking to? He said, yeah, I'm Reverend so-and-so. I'm like, oh, okay, what church do you belong to? I have an online Bible study. I'm like, okay, but where are you calling from? Oh, I'm calling from this community. Okay. Where's your local church? Where's your local church? I don't have a local church. I said, well, you're a reverend. Well, don't you believe that where two or more gathered in the name of Jesus, that he's present? Yes, I believe that. I also believe that the local church is responsible for the building up of the saints, the equipping of the saints, the helping of the saints, the nourishment of the saints. And when you're not a part of the church, you're lacking something in your walk with God. Well, I don't believe that. I just believe that where two or more are gathered. I said, then why are you calling me? Why are you calling me? Because I need help. Well, why should we help you if we're not important? And I would not say this to anybody. But he's like, I'm a reverend. And he's like, so I'm like, we have to have a serious conversation. I said, I need you to know that the church, us, the gathering of believers together, we are the bride of Christ. That Jesus looks at us like we're his wife. And he loves us dearly. And when we choose to say that the church is not important, it's like saying to somebody, your husband is not important. Your wife is not important. You cannot have a relationship with Jesus apart from having a relationship with the church. And I'm not saying that that's Marlboro Christian Church. I'm saying the church. It's mission critical that the church shows up for one another, that we love one another in a way that the community says, wow, I can't believe that they love even that one person that's a part of the church, because they're kind of a blockhead, talking about me. I can't believe they love him like that. It's mission critical that we love each other. Why? Because our entire calling is to take Jesus to other people, and we cannot do it without truth, grace, and love. The greatest of these is love. And we're called to love. And so I want you to know that you're called, no matter how lost you feel, you're called to love people and to love Jesus. And if you start there, you will not miss the mark. If you love God, love others, you will not miss the mark with Jesus. You won't stand in front of Jesus at the end of time and Jesus say to you, nope. But if you go your entire life sitting in rows, giving money, singing songs, and you despise the people that you're around, you've lived contrary to what God has called you to do. We're called to be people of truth, grace, and love. And so if you're not sure what to do, start there. But then there's other people in the room that you need to look at your past and you need to say, what do I need to stop doing? What do I need to stop doing? I did youth ministry for years and years and years. 1 Corinthians 15:33 was the verse that I just kept coming back to. And with my kids as they were growing up, this verse they heard it a lot. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Who you surround yourself with matters. But verse 34 says, come back to your senses as you ought and stop sinning. For there are some of you who are ignorant of God, and I say this to your shame. And so what Paul is saying there, he's like, look, who you surround yourself with matters. And we all know that, right? But then he says, when you know that you're sinning, stop. So for some of you, the fresh start begins not by doing something, by stop doing something. So Nehemiah knows where he should be going. He's asked God for his hand of blessing, and he goes to the king. And he says to the king, I need to go home. I need to go back to Jerusalem. But not only do I need to go back to Jerusalem, I want to rebuild the walls to fortify the defense. Now think, you're asking the king of Persia, who is over top of you, to go back to your land and set up defense against army invasion. Who would you be setting up defense against? The king. So he's like, let me do that. And not only do I want you to let me go to rebuild the walls, I want you to pay for it. I want you to pay for it. The relationship that Nehemiah has with the king of Persia is so strong that the king agrees. He says yes. And he provides him letters for passage, letters for lumber, and he lets him go. For many people, they won't ever make the ask. They'll stop from asking. How many of you guys, if you're honest, struggle with asking for help? Be honest. See, it's true of like almost everyone. See, pride keeps people from getting a fresh start. Not asking. Many people will sit alone in need of help and just suffer through it. And then at the end, you're like, well, why didn't you ask me for help? I just don't do that. Some people, I'll go as far as to say this, there are some people that won't ask for help, but they'll know, other people know that they need help, and they'll get angry with those other people for not helping, but they've never asked. They'll be like, I can't believe they didn't offer to help. I'm like, you never asked. How many of you guys resonate with that or know somebody that does? Right? If that's you, stop getting angry and ask. And then there are other people, they'll answer for other people. They'll be like, I would have asked Carl, but Carl's busy and he's doing this and Kitty just runs him like crazy. And there's no way he would have had time dealing with all of her stuff. And so he would just say no. And so I've already said no for Carl and I haven't even asked him. How many of us do that? Right? See, pride keeps us from asking. It's tough. In Nehemiah chapter 2, Nehemiah gets to the city, takes a look at it, and he meets with the leaders of the city. And he says this, you see the trouble that we are in? Jerusalem lies in ruins. Its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me, and they replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. So the beginning of the wall begins to take shape. The people outside of the city, their enemies, the neighbors, they're kind of jealous about what's happening, and they are in fear of Jerusalem being rebuilt, in fear of Jerusalem becoming a mighty city again. They're in fear, and so they begin to start rumors that there's a war coming, that they're going to attack. They begin to make threats. The work is really hard. I don't know if you guys have ever built a wall, but imagine building a wall and you don't have any cars or trucks. It's difficult work. And so the people begin to get tired. And when you begin to get tired, fear begins to creep in. And fear wants to take you from a fresh start back into a ruined rubble. Fear wants to convince you that everything that you're trying to achieve in your walk with God can't happen. Fear is impractical, and fear wants you to quit. Over and over and over again, fear wants you to quit. It's crazy when I talk to people about their fear. I'll sit down with somebody and say, why don't you do this? And it can be something as simple as telling the truth. Just telling, why can't you tell your spouse the truth? Why can't you own this? Why can't you take this next step in your career? And typically the answer I'll get, it's a fear-related response, and I'll challenge it, and they'll say, what I'm going to tell you is going to sound silly, Ed. What I'm going to tell you is going to sound silly, and they'll bring out their fear, and it's usually silly. Like, Ed, if I go outside and I clear off the sidewalk, they've never said this one, I made this up. If I clear off the sidewalk for the snow, I'm going to slip and fall. I'm going to land off into the grass, and there's going to be a sinkhole. And that sinkhole is going to open up, and I'm going to fall 25 feet. And then the sun's going to come out. It's going to melt all the snow, roll into the hole, and I'm going to drown. So I can't shovel my walk. Ed, that sounds really simple or silly. I'm like, yes, it does. But people will lay out. If I'm honest with my spouse, they're going to walk out the door, they're going to leave me. Wait a second, you've been faithful? You've been doing all this stuff? Yeah, but if I tell them this secret of mine, they're going to leave me. And maybe the secret that you're carrying, maybe will have some serious consequences. But I'm going to tell you, it's probably not as bad as the fear that's living inside of your head. Typically, when God's calling you to move and the fear is telling you to stay, it'll tell you that you're going to end up alone. It's going to tell you that you're going to end up and nobody's going to love you. You're going to lose your reputation. You're going to lose all this stuff. And maybe some of that's true, but I promise you, you'll not end up completely alone because Jesus will never leave you. If you step into the truth, if you step into the light, then God is for you, not against you. There's rubble, might be some ruin, but you will not be alone. Nehemiah chapter 6, the wall is nearing completion. And the enemies of the city are really stressing out. And there's two of them, Sanballat and Geshem. They send a message to Nehemiah, and it says, "Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono." Oh no, don't go. Anyway. But they were scheming to harm me, so I sent messengers to them with this reply: "I'm carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it to go down to you?" 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer: I'm not coming off this wall. I'm not coming down off of the wall. The job is too important. Why is the job too important? I'm going to go back, Hunter, to Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 14. Everything seems to be collapsing and everything's going wrong. People are making threats against them. Nehemiah goes to the people and he says this: "I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes." So Nehemiah's on the wall. People come, they're like, "Hey, come down off the wall, come talk to us." And he's like, "No, the job is too important." He tells the people who are afraid, "Don't be afraid. Remember that your God is powerful and awesome, and do this for your families, for your wives, for your neighbors, for the nation." He's challenging them to do something that matters. It's why I tell you, it's important to name the win. It's important to name the win so that you know what you're fighting for. Know what the fresh start is all about. When Jesus came to earth, John 3:16 says that he came for us because he loved the world. That he was going to be a sacrifice for all of us. And at the end, when he's making his way, he's in the garden. And he's stressed out. And he's full of anxiety over the cross to the point where there's tears of blood. And he prays to his Father in heaven, "If there's any way that I don't have to go to that cross, take this cup from me. But not my will, your will be done." So Jesus goes to the cross to die because he knew the win. You're the win. The fresh start that you get with God is the win on the cross. And so every week we remember that with communion. And so we take this small cup together and we take out the wafer that represents the body that was broken on that cross. And we share it together. And then we take the juice together and we drink it, remembering the blood of Christ that was poured out for our sacrifice. And we do that together. The fresh start that God offers is a new relationship with him. And it's represented in what we just did. The sacrifice of Christ, the blood that was poured out, the body that was broken for you. If you've never made that decision, maybe the next step that you have with God is making a decision to follow Christ. Maybe for some of you, it's the realization that God just wants you to go. Stop looking for the ideal, perfect purpose of your life and just go, love others, love God, and go. What's your next step? I'm going to pray. The band's going to come out and we're going to do one more song. Father God, thank you for your son Jesus who died on the cross to set us free. We remember that sacrifice and we zero in on it in this moment. We thank you for the blood that was poured out and the body that was broken. We thank you, Lord, that you've given us a purpose that's simple. Love God, love others. You've called us to be obedient to your word and to be a part of your church. You've loved us so much. And for that, we love you. Lord, we pray all of this in the name of Jesus. Amen.